What were the details that you missed on Alone Season 10, Episode 1, and what can we learn from them? Hi, my name is Teimojin, and I am a doctor, veteran, and finalist on Alone Season 9. Welcome to this live series where I will be reviewing each week's episode on Alone Season 10, adding my 2 cents and observations, and opening up the floor to your questions, all live. So, whether you're a fan of the show, interested in survival, or the science and medicine behind survival, this YouTube series is for you. So I'll be hosting these lives every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, unless I have a last minute shift. So please subscribe, click the notification so you know when I do pop up sessions just like this one to get you up to speed for all the little things that give you one leading edge on survival and medicine. So if you want to see the last live on the before the drop episode and contestants gear, check out the link. I'll post it right up here or at the end of the video card. So let's start today with our contestants. Let's get a big view. So we have Alan over here. And in this episode 1, we see that Alan, hey, is it going? There we go. Alan takes a little bit of a swim. So for the first few days, it does look like the weather warrants a cold plunge. And even if you are doing it, good for hygiene, good for morale. And also looking at the water landscapes and the forms in the water a little more closely. I imagine that spot is going to be a pretty nice access to potentially deeper water. So maybe we'll see Alan make a bridge to that little rock point and then maybe something even further out. And I think that could be a potentially good fishing spot. So things to note, it is colder water. These lakes are very vast and massive. So hypothermia is a possibility. But again, we're early on. He has a lot of calories to shiver. And sometimes it's just nice to stay clean. So one thing that Alan also does is he catches a fish. So he catches this big boy and notices that there's roe in here. And he decides that on his first night, he's going to eat the roe and I think the leftover fish head. Now, that's quite a lot of roe. And preservation wise, there's not a really good way to do that. One of the things that may be difficult, that combination of a fish head and also roe, it's pretty fishy, pretty salty, can be difficult to digest and palate. So it might be the case where if he's able to add some meats from the fish and hopefully some things that his forage, whether that's berries, roots, or so forth, that may make that meal a little more palatable because we see him kind of gag when he's trying to eat that roe, which is cooked. There's another contestant this episode that eats roe a little different. So we'll talk about that in a little while. So next, moving on to Luke. Luke is such a beast. So he goes on and goes on a walk, no shirt, just enjoying the hot weather while he can. And that's a point for two reasons. Number one, if it wasn't in a different location where the temperatures or the radiation from the sun would be a little higher, that is exposure to sunburns and specifically lip burns. So one of the things that I disliked the most out there was how beautiful it was the day before launch, and all of us were pretty much sunbathing, and I managed to get a sunburn on your lips. Your lips doesn't have a whole lot of melanin, the protective cells in your body for sun, and that's pretty easy to burn. So with that, not allowed to bring chapsticks, and if you don't have any fat to put over your lips, that can be pretty uncomfortable. But what I used out there is pine sap. So pine sap, not the best moisturizer, but it does provide a barrier. So for small scrapes, chapsticks, you can put on some pine sap. It is a little sticky, but it smells great, tastes pretty good as well. And we see Luke off the bat getting a grouse, pretty much base of the spine. Excellent, excellent shot. I'm going to see if I have any more notes on Alan and Luke, because one thing that I wanted to touch base on is all the little hints that we might see on the previews, on the promos, and everything in between. So, just to recap for people who haven't seen my last episode, Luke is from an OG survivalist family out in Montana, Idaho currently. And his thing is primitive survival. So, he's one of the only people, he is the only people, and one of the only people in Alone history that did not bring a ferro rod because I imagine he is pretty darn confident in friction fires. And fingers crossed he gets a fire and is able to do really well. And we see that in his shelter video that he is able to build a fire. I wish they showed us what he did and how successful he was, but day day one, two, three, it looks like there was a fire there enough to mess up his sleeping bag. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. There you go. So that's Luke's setup, and a few things that I wanted to go over that may have not been mentioned previously if you don't have access to some of the 10 item videos on History app or not. But if you don't, get a VPN, switch it to a US code, and then enjoy the History app. That's what I use. I'm in Canada. So things to note is Luke sets up right off the beach. So again, it's pretty nice out, not too bad of a location, but you're getting pretty high winds. He has, I believe, that is a -60, possibly synthetic bag. Looks like maybe a mummy bag. But if you've seen my last video, we talk about the configurations for the hoods. So I have this a similar bag like this. I'm pretty sure it's the same brand, and the tie off on top is pretty much squared. So not the best. You want something that's hooded and have baffles around the neck. That will trap the most amount of heat and add that additional layer to your head cover and your neck warmer when the colder months gets there. So with that, you don't really need a whole lot of shelter if there's no rain. But at the same time, if there was kind of a sudden storm or something like that, um, that would make all your equipment wet. So he does have a tarp. That's an option for him to use. One thing that isn't shown on episode one is him clearing that ground to make that shelter, which he uses his spade. It's an interesting shape. It's more of like a point, and he was able to change out the stem of that shovel to something a little longer. So I imagine he's going to be making an earth shelter or something close to it. So we see him using that, and then again using brush and long grass for his bedding. What I used on my first day one is put up a tarp really fast, easy within minutes. And then for my bedding, I just put my equipment down there. So that was enough. And I didn't even use my sleeping bag up until day 10 because I just put my parka over me and then slipped my legs into my snow pants. And that was more than enough to keep warm. And unfortunately, the sparks and the embers from the fire go onto his sleeping bag. Again, synthetic materials puncture holes. So luckily, it's not a huge damage, but there are some small holes there. So it's a little more susceptible to moisture. Other things that I noticed was reputation. Family reputation is something that may be pretty important to Luke. And there's bound to be some shortcomings. There's bound to be some failures. So it will be very interesting to see from a mind game and mental standpoint how he positions himself when he gets those first failures, if he gets those first failures. And we see him getting a grouse, great shot, and his dad mentioning that you got to fill your belly basket first. So when we talk about reserves, which with his shirt off, we do see some reserves there. So again, if you're able to consume as much calories as possible and prolong that reserves on your body, the better. All right. So you're losing about half a pound to a pound and a half at the most if you're going heavy on your shelter every day. So that's almost 30 pounds or 15 pounds within the first month. So be mindful. He speaks about energy conservation and energy efficiency. So he is right on track to getting what he needs out there. And it does look like he has an encounter with a black bear. So that's really cool to see. And then one thing that I did want to mention about Alan, because this is something that may be overlooked by some, but I think it's going to be the one of the things that really makes this storyline, his storyline, shine. So one of the things that he mentions, and I connect with this so much because I had a grandfather who passed away not soon before my launch, but enough for me to feel it, you know. So his father died of cancer in his 70s, kind of before his time, and was one of his biggest inspirations for the outdoors. And he talks about him relating to owls as guardians, and also his mom telling him, wait for dad to see you or to come visit you. And that happens for him. The owl is circling around that. So that sense of connection, that sense of someone's looking after you, that's going to help him so much, because not only does he know that dad's watching over him, dad's giving him some tips, he also has, sorry for the beeps, he also has reasons to push on for his family back home too. So another thing that's maybe not shown on the episode, but shown on a separate first night episode, Shelter from the Storm on the History app, is how he sets up his tarp. And I think that his tarp is a beautiful, beautiful configuration, because it not only covers the top, he also wraps it around like a ground sheet. So there's still a bit of an opening, lots of airflow. But again, this is a hotter time during the initial season. So airflow and comfort of moving around might be the thing to go for, as long as you're dry. So no issues with that. Lee. So Lee grew up in Alaska, and one of the things that he talks about is his ancestral roots, and making his shelter, his needle bed, things that he's been taught as a kid to do. And one of the things that was super, super impressive was what he decided to do, knowing that he's a skinnier guy and needs more food resources. So Lee decides to, number one, scout for a fishing spot. He finds a great fishing spot. And then what he does next is he makes a netting needle. So if you see in the video how he's setting up a net, it looks like he's almost weaving between lines. So that's a netting needle, and that increases the speed and efficiency in which you can make nets. So I know Luke brought a net with him, I believe. And that's great. Means a vending machine basically. But another great option, if you have the skills, and it doesn't take a whole lot of skills and knowledge to make a needling net and to make a net, you just need practice of it. So Clay practiced making nets over and over again before he launched. I practiced before I knew the location, and then fishing regulations said no nets, so I left that behind. But netting needles are going to make it so much easier. One thing that I would recommend is netting needle, kind of a gauge to know how spacious your holes are. And in addition to that, when you're modifying your multi-tool, make sure you have something that has a saw or a digging tool, because if you take a picture of a netting needle, you'll notice that it's kind of like a slab and then a needle inside that slab. So to get into that slab, what I like doing is I drill holes at close to the tip and close to the middle, and then I use my saw to kind of saw up, and then I just whittle it down to that little needle, and you can make a net very quickly. And not only that, you can make multiple nets if you're using your paracord as your netting material as well. I see some questions coming up. Keep it coming. Whatever you guys are curious about, whatever you guys thought, hey, that was a bad idea, or why would that person do that? Let me know in the comments, because one thing that I do have access to is I can talk to these guys. I can reach out to these guys and clarify a few things for you. And for things that I can clarify myself, I'll do that in the live Q&A, which is going to happen right after this. So besides that, he makes a raft, and he goes, I wonder why people bring extra tarps to make a raft, because when he was a kid, he would just Tom Sawyer it and make rafts out of dead trees, which is an excellent idea. Again, looking at how he made his raft, the girth or the diameter of the wood that he was using was about wrist thick, so very manageable things that you probably would take 4 strikes on each side with your axe, or just a little bit of work with your saw to make that raft. And he's able to scout out the perfect spot for fish, drops his net that he makes, and then immediately catches fish. Not only with that, also his fishing rod too, which is a pretty nice setup. If you guys haven't seen how to make a primitive fishing rod, Clay has a great video on it because that's what he used. And I see a lot of the contestants from season 10 using that same setup. One thing that you can do is put a little bit of a heftier weight. One of the contestants mentioned that the shoreline was pretty shallow where they were. So if you put a heavier waiter and kind of swing around your line and then whip it out, you're able to get some significant distance. You just need the proper setup for that. And I'm not sure if trot lines are allowed, but that's a great way to shoot out your trot lines as well if you don't have a boat. But Lee, within the first episode, has a raft, has a net. I know people are concerned about his weights, but based on his knowledge and getting food up front, like for his body size, I don't know how tall he is. That's at least probably 5 days of food if he's eating like abundantly. So one thing that Lee does do a little different than Alan is he eats the roe raw, and he feels that energy, and he feels invigorated by that. Now, from my standpoint, I'm always going to tell you the safest thing to do, and the safest thing to do is to always cook your food. My preference is boiling. Not only does it help break down the toughness and helps remove some of the gaminess, you can flavor it with different things, and that's my preference. You're avoiding any possibility of cysts, ova, parasites, viruses, bacteria, and so forth. Sometimes you can't see the cysts, oftentimes you can't, and sometimes you can't see the parasites either, like worms, fish worms. So gets a big lake trout, gets a big pike in the net, has a shelter set up. His is a little more lofty, but again, this is a temporary shelter, so no big deal. So he might prioritize just airflow so he can dry out his stuff if need be. And he also puts ribs up, which I thought was a nice touch. So ribs being really smooth saplings, and then putting it on top of his ridgeline to kind of bolster up that tarp shelter, which I thought was a really good idea. All righty, so that was Lee. That's his little raft over there. Awesome idea. So it's basically lined next to each other, and then some X's on both sides. So if you look at a lot of rafts in like tropical areas, Amazon rainforest type of deal, that's the type of rafts that they can easily make, especially with bamboo. So good on him using not his paracord, because I imagine he wants to save that for his nets and other material and other projects. He uses with his snare wire. So that's him making it. And I think right over there, that's where you can see that netting needle. And again, that's one of his fish that he catches and eats the roe. So Cade is our cowboy of the season. And one thing that I really liked that he said first time dropped off is he wants to be as quiet as possible. He wants to not do a whole lot and have some quiet observation. And I think he's going to be the guy to look for understanding and seeing how he patterns animals. Immediately, he goes to a birch tree and makes a call. And may sound funny to people who don't call moose, but that was a pretty good call. And not too long after that, he sees a caribou walk into view. And unfortunately, he's not allowed to take caribou. And again, different place, different regulations. So, you know, if it's an endangered species or if it's something that the community needs for their sustenance, then you got to go without it. He does get a bunch of blueberries, and with his titanium pot, or I think he does have a titanium pot, he's able to carry that and use it as a little container. One thing I do caution is if you're harvesting a lot of berries, you either eat a bunch of it, boil it, make a jam, boil it, do what Carrie Lee did and make some fruit slabs if you can't eat it, because if you're eating a lot of berries, depending on the berries, you can get an upset stomach, the acidity level, and just sometimes even the fiber level can not agree with you. But he looks like his animal has a full pot of blueberries, which is awesome. And one thing from a character standpoint that I'm excited to point out is that he guides, he hunts, and he's gone from family for 3 months at a time. So in his mind, I imagine in his family's mind, it's not too big of a deal to be gone like 90 days. And if his gone 90 days, chances are he's probably having a less than 10% chance, or my math is really poor at this time, but he has a really good chance of winning if he goes 90 days. Historically, people typically go anywhere from 70 to 80 if you don't have that incentive of $1 million at day 100. He One thing he does mention though is he didn't want to gain weight. He says this is not a starvation game. He wants to thrive out there. And he does get a headshot on a grouse. So he does have a good shot. He is capable of getting food. But again, think about what starvation or keto diets are. So if you're thinking about, let's say you and me want to lose some weight, want to get a little more trim, and want to test out keto diet, to go into ketosis, it's about 50 grams of carbs. Below that, then you'll get into ketosis. What does that equal to? That equals to about medium size white bagel um, with nothing on it, basically. And that's about anywhere from 250 to 280 kilocalories. So even though that doesn't seem like a whole lot to us because we eat a lot more, to get that amount from just berries is quite a lot. So to get that from carbs or sugars, that's quite a lot. So um, some berries can be as little as like 60 to 100 kilocalories per like portion, which would be like a handful. And again, with that acidity level, those berries at that high volume may not agree with you. So if you have to eat close to 200, that's like at least four handfuls in a day, four to six. So if you can tolerate that, you can tolerate that and just barely meet that ketosis mark. And likely the case that won't be an everyday thing. So you're going to end up in ketosis. You're going to end taking mass off of your fat first, and then from your body in the form of proteins. So I don't quite agree with not gaining any weight. I think that gives you a little bit of a cushion. And what I like doing, or I recommend, is at least 20 pounds. That gives you 20 days of kind of steady work in your first month there. Um, One thing that is going to probably weigh on Cade is things to do with family. So I'm not going to talk about it now because I know it's a sensitive topic. So don't be rude about it. These are all people. These are all incredibly strong people, but they're still human beings. So give them some encouragement, give them some kudos. I know this first episode was and rough for him in other standpoints as well. He loses his arrows, but be kind, be respectful, ask questions, be curious and inquisitive. You'll learn a lot more. And yeah, we'll all appreciate that. So he does lose 9 of his arrows. So that's, I don't know how many broadheads, I don't know how many blunt tips. But on the topic of arrows, just looking at his quiver, there are a little difference in quiver options. So let me show you what I did. So this is my quiver setup over here. And this is just your classic one, and it has some rivets over here to tie what I use to kind of take game out if they're not killed on shot. But things that you might want to think about when you're getting a quiver for an adventure type like this is, do you want it on your bow? So the lighter kind of long bows or recurve bows, they are pretty feather light. So you can put a few arrows there. So you're always having access to your arrows. And I would always keep one knocked if you're kind of just strolling around. So what I would do is I would keep one knocked and then two in my dominant hand. And as soon as I see something, I would put those arrows kind of in front of me, kind of line up for the shot, take it. And since I'm not as good of a shot as some of these guys, I anticipate taking multiple shots. Now, for broadheads, one of the things that I learned from Benji, because we were in boot camp exchanging kind of information on, hey, these are my stuff. This is my arrows. This is my bow and whatever. And just looking at the type of points he had, they were pretty darn aggressive and simple. So he had like a triangle type of point and single bevel. So really easy to sharpen in the field. And another thing that I really liked about Benji's blunt tips is they were aggressive as well. I believe they're called tiger blunts. So they're kind of like serrated and kind of like looking like that. But at the same time, they had, I think, a component of what judo points look like, or correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but those little wiry things that come out on the sides. So when he's taking game, that tiger point really rips through it, but at the same time, those other wires at the on the sides, there's four of them, really grab onto it. So you're not like losing your arrows. Because I found with just the blunt tips, which have like a small little points, 4 points on it, they're going through grouse pretty good, and sometimes they go through and through. Sometimes the grouse wouldn't even kind of feel that and get taken down because the trauma wasn't enough. It was almost like a clean cut through. So think about applying more trauma with your blunt tips, and looking at also the fletchings as well. I see some people are bringing flus, which are big fluffy fletchings. So the airspeed on that is a little less. So when you're taking those higher shots, they're not going super far away and you're losing those. So it's a little bit about arrows. One thing that wasn't really shown on the episode was building this awesome shelter. So few good points, few not so good points. What do we think about location, right? So location, looking right at the water, pretty close, pretty exposed. But one thing that he does point out, and I'm not sure if he points it out in the episode or if it was on Shelter from the Storm, that segment, where he talks about why he chose that location. He says that there's a rock, a big rock there that's kind of up against the shore, and he used his spade to dig down to be up against that rock. I think that's a great idea. So he can use that, but at the same time, again, he's going to be pretty exposed to that wind. So as soon as he gets out of his shelter, that could be an issue. But yeah, another thing you have to account for is the ease of making that type of shelter. He already had in his mind that he was probably going to make a ground shelter. So the ground near the shore, I imagine if it's more sandy, would be easier to work with than something deeper in the forest where you're having to hack away through lots of roots. So you got to make that decision and kind of live with it. But love that he's using a lot of moss in there. He's using the heat from the earth. I would also insulate from the earth walls as well. So if he's able to put like maybe a foot of insulation on the walls, that'll make it so darn toasty in there. So again, we're thinking about our layers of layers of layers. And on Alone Season 9, my layers were number one, a moss kind of 2 foot thick layer. And that layer on the colder months was added, I added ice to it. So I would pour my leftovers from my reindeer moss and then made an ice, like a 2 foot ice wall around my whole shelter, and even on some of the tops as well. So we'll see how this turns out and how exposure is when it gets colder. One thing, let's see, he dug out the spade, and then his sleeping bag I mentioned in the last episode was looked kind of synthetic, but a minus 35. So we'll see how he does with that too. So all in all, looking at Cade's kind of decisions, his seeing multiple big game in there, I have high hopes for maybe this is going to be the guy that gets big game on this season. So we'll see. He is the youngest on the season, but that doesn't mean he has the least experience. So we'll see. I am excited to announce that I did get approval by PR to talk to Cade and Melanie about some of their options that they chose, specifically soap. So if you want to learn specifically about how soap can benefit your health on an expedition like this and why it's so important to Cade, give us a follow and click that notification, so that will be a bonus on top of my Mondays lives at 8 p.m. And if you guys are interested in the type of gear that I use, gear that I recommend, both for alone and things that I use on expeditions, whether that's safety stuff, medical stuff, especially our Canadians, I have an online store for medical Canadian stuff that are all FDA approved. So this is trauma equipment, not your standard first aid stuff. So this is things that are going to save your life out there. So give that a check on my website, description is down below. It's at www.survivaldoctors.com/store. So next we have Jodi. So Jodi, again, complete badass. I know that she's going to be gunning hard for whatever she does out there. And one thing that she does commit to is starting a log cabin. I'm not sure if I have a picture of that here. So her location, and I do agree with some of the things that she mentioned, is more inside the forest. So typically 100 to 150 meters, maybe even 200 meters from a big opening like a lakefront or an open field, that would give you some adequate protection from the wind and the crosswinds. So she goes into the forest, finds a big old reindeer moss field, and says, "Hey, this is where I'm going to build my log cabin." So one of the things that she does point out is reindeer moss is super fluffy. One of the things that you might not know is reindeer moss takes a long time to grow. So one of the things that I really liked connecting with is, hey, this patch of reindeer moss, because I collect almost 15 pounds of it, could have been eaten by the ancestors of the land, by animals hundreds and thousands of years old. And I still have some of my reindeer moss over here. So I have my little baggie of reindeer moss. This is processed because after being out there for so long and processing it, I wanted to take it home because I felt like it was a waste of food. So I have a bunch of baggies just like this of reindeer moss, and I also have some fireweed root, which does have some calories in it, some carbs in it. So you would kind of put that in your boiling water. Here, let's see if I can get there. Put that in your boiling water, and then just chew off the outer bark of that. And it does have a little bit of spice to it, so it was nice. It was warming, especially with the colder months. Reindeer moss, you do need to either exchange water or boil water multiple times. On our survival manual, it said several times, so I just did it 7 times. And what it does is it removes the acid from it. And the acid is really important to remove because number one, tastes horrendous, but number two, if you go back to your basic chemistry class, you can have the acid crystals kind of come into that crystal form in the acidity in your stomach. So when two different acids have different kind of pH, normal, like their balance point, one of them can crystallize, and that's what happens with reindeer moss. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of indigenous groups use reindeer moss to hunt predators like wolves. So they would stuff it in like chicken stomachs or caribou stomachs and throw it out into the woods. The wolves would eat it. The acidity in their stomach would make the acidity in the moss crystallize, and that would just rip up their guts and they would die. So really important to know how to process it properly because reindeer moss adds fiber. Great for constipation because we see that a bunch on alone. People complaining about not having a bowel movement for such a long time. I was stuck for almost over 2 weeks, and I added reindeer moss, and I was going 2 to 3 times a day. Nice big bowel movements, and it was not stressful as well because when you're having hemorrhoids plus constipation plus all this backup, you're gonna have nausea too. So check out those people who've been without food for a long amount of time. Your gut kind of goes to sleep. And then when you have a big meal or try to eat a big meal, it's not really going because of the constipation, plus your gut's asleep. And then you'll end up getting nauseated and vomiting and wasting all those calories. So that can be an option if, or a prediction if someone goes through that, and or if they're not cleaning or cooking their food properly or having good hygiene using utensils. So that's one thing about reindeer moss, which I love reindeer moss. It's something that really helped me out there. And if you have kind of like salts, you're able to season your meals, and it was my spaghetti out there. So really cool find for her. But yeah, getting back to the shelter, Jodi commits to a log cabin, and again, it's going to be a toss up to see if this is going to be a really warm shelter or if it's going to be a huge expenditure and what she's gambling there. So we know she's a fighter. We know that she has the heart to do it. We know that she has some caloric reserves to do it. Let's just see how it plans out. Because again, when we're thinking about our value, log cabins traditionally made, yeah, sure, it has a bunch of R value, but in a survival context like this, if you're taking things that maybe are too wrist thick and you're not really chinking it properly, you're still getting a lot of wind through there. So I would much rather prefer a 2 foot thick moss cabin that's kind of less calories and thicker insulation. So we'll see how that goes. With that being said, we are on to our Q&A. Thank you guys for submitting so many questions on the live. I encourage everyone to comment if you are seeing this on the replay to see what questions we have or just comments. I know Kevin Hart, the username, is a long-standing commenter on Alone Contestants, so he always puts his 2 cents, whether that's right or wrong is always there. So read the comments too, because sometimes he does have some good ideas out there. So let's start out with the top. Eric mentions that they're restricting future seasons to only a block of salt. So my blend of electrolytes can be kiboshed. So if you don't know, check out the last segment on electrolytes from my last live. I mentioned that blocks of salts has sodium chloride, has trace mineral salts, but what you really want is enough potassium and magnesium. Calcium you can get from potentially bones, but if you're trying to save weight, potassium, magnesium, adding it to your sodium is super important. So that's what I brought out there, those 3 different salts mixed in, and then I brought some sugar as well. So if you can't bring it in a salt blend, then maybe you can add it into something else, which is something that contestants in the past have done. Hey. All right, let's see. Yep. So again, if you're trying to watch these supplemental information and you're trying to find it, get a VPN, switch it to the US, and then go on the history app. You're able to see the extra stuff there. Oh, Kevin Hart's here. All right. So is trapping worth it out there? So we'll go through snare wire. So people on season 9, 10, most seasons bring snare wire. And Kevin's saying that, hey, you're expending calories, setting up the traps, walking your trap line. It's not worth it. So kilocalorie wise, like you might get maybe 400 from a fatty rabbit and a lot less from a squirrel. But at the same time, you're getting something. You're getting fuel, you're getting resources. You can make things, lures out of the fur. You can eat the fur, which is one thing that Tom did, and I don't think anyone else on Alone History has done, besides people who get porcupine. Is he ate the squirrels whole. So what he did is he roasted the outside, so all the hair would come off, and then he ate it kind of like a roasted pig. So he ate all his animals like that, and you are gaining calories from the eating the skin. You are kind of making sure all that moisture from the fat and all that stays within the animal, because it's not really dripping down, because it's encased in the skin when you're doing it like that. And then if you combine that plus boiling it, and you're getting the bones a little mushy, you're able to get the spinal cord, the brain, and all the other stuff, then you're really using a huge amount of that animal. So do I think trapping is worth it? 100%. And do I think mouse trapping is worth it? It can be if it's spreading kind of disease and becoming a nuisance inside your shelter. So I made Paiutes, 2 or 3 Paiutes on the inside of my shelter, 2 or 3 Paiutes on the outside of my shelter, because there was an Irving coming into my shelter trying to mess around. And by setting that up, he was triggering them and then getting scared. So didn't catch him, but again, he wasn't eating some of my berries and resources on the inside or messing up my gear, because that has been an issue in the past too. So I do think it's worthwhile. He mentions all you need is a little pit lined with clay, some concave walls, bait at the bottom, sometimes with water to catch many mice. So I think mice can dig out of that, to be honest, and I think mice can climb out of that. So let me know what you think in the comments. Actually, sea salt is a blend of electrolytes. Yes, it is a blend of electrolytes, but to get to the amount that you need. So when we're thinking about how much you need for potassium supplements, so let's say if you're really deplenished at the end state of starvation, the very bare minimum you'll be getting at the hospital is 40 milliequivalents of potassium chloride, which is just over 2,000 milligrams. So if you're looking at half salt, that's about 4 times the serving of half salt. That's not in sea salt. That's not in your Himalayan salt. And definitely there's not enough magnesium in there to do what you need to supplement your body. Yep, grouse doesn't have a whole lot of calories, especially if you're just eating the breast. Um, Kevin, I think you're looking at the caloric value for just some of the proteins. Some of the websites out there doesn't take into account if you're conserving the skin, if you're eating the brain, if you're eating the bones, you're getting the marrow. So again, I do think it's a little more than 200 kilocalories. Um, you don't need to be walking and actively hunting. Like I said, if you pattern your animals correctly or well enough that you know where they're going to be, and you're just sitting there making traps and waiting for them, that could be a good option as well. So birds, all birds need grit in their gizzard to masticate or chew whatever they're eating. So um, if you are in a gritty place inside the forest, like a river or a spring, that could be an option where every few days, every 4 days for me, when I was in Labrador, I would just wait because my shelter was right next to spring. So I just knew every 3 to 4 days I would hear the grouse come down in the morning and take anywhere from 1 to 2 on those times. So I'm not walking a huge distance. I was walking less than 100 meters. So, yep, you would have to catch 20 grouse per day to make up for their 4 to 5K kilocalories of what you would need to maintain your weight out there, which that's a realistic amount. 4 to 5 kilocalories a day, and for some of the heavier people, especially the heavier males, I wouldn't be surprised if they're pushing 6K kilocalories and what they would need to sustain their weight. But again, there's not a whole lot out there that could sustain that level of kilocalories. So you're going to be losing weight no matter what. All right. Thank you, Kevin, for all the questions. Form a netting needle. Oh, that's a good idea. So, what is a fast way to get a netting needle? So, one of the options is Kevin was mentioning you can put sticks together, and then in my mind, he's saying 2 sticks together. I want to see a picture of that because in my mind, there's kind of a middle needle and then 2 things or an encompassing arc on either side. So, in my mind, I would maybe use 3. So let me know what you think. And if you guys find a 2 stick netting needle, post it in the comments, post the link to it as well so everyone can learn from it. Yep, agree. If you are making a net, netting needles an option. If you're making a net with overhands and just tying it off, just know that you're going to need a significant amount of inner lining to the length of that outer strand or that sheath of the paracord. So I would say like anticipate the length of that needs to be at least 5 times the length of your outer strand. Yeah, Kevin, hopefully will be on one of these lives if he gets a camera and a mic. But he does have a lot of things to say. Whether he's done it himself, questionable. Okay, we're talking about so what is the perfect diameter for a net? And that really depends on what fish you're trying to catch. In this season, we have pike, we have lake trout. So these are big fish. So ideally, that's what you're going to be targeting. So anything that's kind of like 4 fingers width, that's a great type of width. Anything smaller, you'll be getting smaller fish. Sometimes those bigger fish can get caught in it. But again, if you want to conserve your energy or conserve the amount of fish that are in the lake and only getting the big ones, that's an option too. So ideally, you would have multiple different diameter nets or different gauge nets out there. Okay, lots about nets. So different netting things for trapping. Wh- What is a good way for ground snares to set up your ground snares? We can definitely go on highways, looking at little trails in the ground, looking at transition points between marsh and forest and kind of flat land. Those transition points are really nice, and setting up a bunch of snares. So one thing that is even nicer, especially if you have a surplus of food like guts and stuff like that, is making a trapping corral. So I think Winia makes one in season of Frozen, the one that you on. So making kind of like a corral is kind of like a little gate. So think about like a horse gate, but make that out of spruce boughs or pine tree boughs so that it kind of looks like a big old bush, and have like small entry points that are where your snares are going to be. And on the inside, you may put whatever leftover stuff you have in there. And on the outside, if you're looking for trapping predators like foxes, if that's allowed, you'll definitely need bigger, maybe more stronger gauge wire as well, but around that bush or that corral. So foxes and predators typically sniff around it. So you'll be able to catch that in addition to the prey type of animals that are going into the corral. So that's a really good idea, something that I wish I did more of. But at my location, unfortunately, just had squirrels. How long will Lee's raft last? So, based on its construction, it's basically lined up logs with some crossovers. And he talks about getting a waterlog. So as soon as that dead tree, it's porous, so that's why it's floating, gets waterlogged, then he might need to either bolster it up, so make it add another layer on top of it, or make a brand new one. So, depending on what he does out there, I think he has enough resources if he keeps on catching fish like he is catching to build a second one. Or maybe he's going to build a bridge. That might be a good thing to temporize until the winter and the ice gets there. So, we'll see. I think it will take at least a week or two before he gets completely waterlogged, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has it up until it gets really cold and frosty out there. So debris. So is it better to use material or tarps as your raft? So one thing that you see the Bear Brothers doing on some of their YouTube videos, if you haven't checked them out, check them out now because they're pretty awesome. And they make a raft by just putting a tarp and putting a bunch of pine tree or spruce boughs in it, making kind of like a donut, and then just wrapping it like a big old kind of donut tubey thing. And that is a really fast way to make a raft. Whether it's durable or easy to control, that's another question. But Kevin was mentioning spraying your packs and so forth. Again, due to production, is that allowed or not? That may be a problem. And again, spraying your pack, if it has zippers, not 100% waterproof, so that might sink. So, can contestants use their GoPros to review where they lost their things? Yeah, there's multiple different cameras, and you can potentially review that. And I honestly believe he's going to find it. So it is a big, bulky thing to lose. So if it's just kind of indexing where he went, I'm like so certain that he's going to find it because I found arrows out there, and sometimes it would be weeks later I'd find arrows. So if you're walking similar trails all the time, he's bound to find it. So why did Cade lose his arrows? Just looking at some preliminary quiver like arrows slash bow footage, it looks like it was one of the bows is it's a strap-on quiver. So some bows are pre-drilled and then you can attach your quiver that way, which is pretty darn secure. But other bows don't have that option, and you don't want to be drilling into your bow when it's not meant to be drilled at, and that could kind of mess with the strength, but also integrity of your bow. So I think it was just a strap on. Maybe the Velcros got undone and he lost it that way. But I'm sure he's going to find it. All right, we have another comment over here. Take this shot. So can you survive on an experience like Alone with no pot? And one of the comments over here we have is you can do it by making a pit, lining it with a tarp, put water in it, and then use stones to boil that water. That's definitely a way to purify your water. You can cook things like that as well. Is it a convenient way to do it? And especially when it's frozen out there, maybe less so. And one things that I would caution against if you're cooking out of it and drinking out of it, if there's any contaminations with animals or scavengers that go into that, because you would have to cover it pretty much completely, especially if you're cooking with it. That could be an issue with getting gut illnesses out there. So definitely an option, but I would still 10 out of 10 times bring my pot, and I'll 10 out of 10 times bring my sleeping bag. Those are the two things that I would always bring on something like this. So, should you bring mechanical or spring loaded broadheads out there? So, if you look at it, the more mechanisms you have in a broadhead, especially if you're there for God knows how long, that's more areas of breakpoints. So, just using some of my modern broadheads, I was breaking them in target practice at boot camp compared to something like Benji brought, which was just a slab of metal that was like your traditional triangle formation, single grind on each side, super sharp, super easy to sharpen up and up into the field too, even if you're using a rock. And what he did is he actually gifted me one. So I got I think two squirrels and a grouse with the broadhead that he gifted me. So definitely recommend things that are reliable, easy to sharpen out there. All right. Controversial comment. You do not need a sleeping bag, cooking pot, ferro rod, axe, saw, paracord, fishing kit, or snare wire to survive on Alone. If you had none of that and you had 10 items to choose from, what would you choose? Put that in the comment. And also, how would you replace all of these things? So we talked about sleeping bag, maybe using your tarp, using your clothing, but if that gets wet, hey, hypothermia, 3 hours. That's the timeline before you are incapacitated to manage things on your own, oftentimes sooner because of dehydration. Cooking pot, like we talked about, yeah, you can, but not super convenient. Ferro rod, yeah, we see Luke didn't bring us a ferro rod, but do you have the skills and experience to do it in every single environment and every single weather condition? And then fishing kit, it a lot. This would be really hard and impressive if someone does this and then goes upwards of 70 days in the wilderness doing this. What's up? We have some people coming from Virginia. Welcome, welcome. Sling bow is better than a normal bow. Yep, slingshots definitely can take small game, but again, Kevin, you're saying you don't want small game. So what do you want? So no small game, and then you're also saying big game's the way to go because of the fat content. So are you going to take a sling plus arrows? Maybe that's what you're talking about. I'm not sure. So what does that taste like? I imagine, Taryn, you were mentioning maybe this reindeer moss. So whatever you cook it with. So it's kind of like a spaghetti. Once you boil it and exchange the water multiple times, it really doesn't have a distinct taste. And one of the things that you can do is you can grind it up into a flour and supplement it to anything that you're eating. Kind of acts as a thickener. It does add fibers, does add some minute amounts of calories, and surprisingly amino acids as well. All right. So if you had a choice of 9 arrows, what would they look like? Would they be broadheads? Would be more, or would you have more blunt tips? What kind of blunt tips would you choose? Would you bring some flus out there? So all good good questions to be answered. Let me know your preference. I would bring personally at least two flu flus, majority broad tips or blunt tips, and then four, 4 to 5 broadheads. But I'd probably stick to four. I think that's what I brought. So, should you be boiling your water all at once, or should you be boiling it as you need? So, definitely chopping wood, making a fire, that could be tenuous. You are expending calories doing all those things. So, one of the options Kevin is mentioning is boil it all at the same time. And if you have a storage container to do that, you can do that. Again, you're wanting to make sure that source is never tainted by animals, droppings, so forth. So if you can do that and if you can protect that, then go for it. Boil a bunch at once. All right, a lot of same things. So I'll leave it there. Anyone else have questions? We're getting at that hour mark. Thank you for showing up. Again, if you like these, comments and live sessions, feel free to subscribe and click that notification, and you'll be notified not only for the Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but also for the pop-up ones with supplemental information and also information on things that you guys want to talk about. So if you want to talk about hygiene, if you want to talk about massive hemorrhage out there, if you want to talk about things that aren't really shown on TV, just let me know in the comments. And the one with the most likes, I'll make a supplemental video on top of the ones I do on Mondays. All right, guys. Take care. I'll see you next time.